Maya Chen always sat in the same spot. Back row, third seat from the window. It wasn't that she was trying to hide exactly. She just didn't want to be noticed. And in a classroom full of students who seemed to know exactly who they were and what they wanted, being invisible felt safer. The music room at Lincoln High smelled like old wood and dust. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Maya would slip into her seat while the other students chatted about their weekend performances or the competitions they'd won. She'd open her notebook and sketch tiny drawings in the margins while Mrs. Davidson, their music teacher, talked about chord progressions and musical history. Maya hadn't wanted to take this class. She'd wanted art, advanced painting to be specific, but her schedule hadn't worked out, and the guidance counselor had shrugged and said every student needed an arts credit anyway. So here she was, surrounded by kids who actually cared about music, pretending to care too. Mrs. Davidson was the kind of teacher who wore flowing scarves and spoke passionately about composers like they were old friends. She had gray hair that she twisted into a messy bun, and reading glasses that hung on a beaded chain around her neck. She was nice enough, Maya supposed. But she barely looked at the students in the back row. Her attention stayed fixed on the front, where the talented ones sat. There was Jennifer Park, who played violin and had already been accepted to 3 music conservatories. Kevin Wu, who played classical guitar and performed at coffee shops on weekends. And then there was Rachel Stevens, the pianist who everyone said was heading to Juilliard. They were the stars, the ones Mrs. Davidson called on, the ones she smiled at. Maya was fine with that arrangement. She showed up, did the minimum required work, and counted down the days until the semester would end. She'd get her credit and move on. That was the plan. Then Mrs. Davidson made the announcement that changed everything. It was a regular Thursday afternoon in late March. Spring was trying to push through the gray winter weather, and everyone was getting restless. Mrs. Davidson stood at the front of the room, clapping her hands together in that way teachers do when they want attention. "All right, everyone, settle down. I have exciting news about our spring assembly." The room got quiet, but it was the nervous kind of quiet. The kind where everyone tenses up because they know something's coming. As you know, the spring assembly is our department's biggest event of the year. Parents come, the whole school attends, and it's a wonderful opportunity to showcase what we've been learning. Maya's stomach dropped. She had a bad feeling about where this was going. This year, every single student in this class will be performing. The room erupted. Some students cheered. Others groaned. Maya felt like she might throw up. Now, I know some of you are nervous," Mrs. Davidson continued, speaking over the noise, "but this is a required part of your grade. Everyone participates. No exceptions." A hand shot up. It was Daniel Kim, a quiet kid who sat 2 rows ahead of Maya. "What if we don't play an instrument?" Mrs. Davidson smiled. "Then you'll learn one. Or you'll sing. We have 2 months to prepare." "That's plenty of time. 2 months." Maya's hands started to sweat. She hadn't performed music in front of people in 3 years. She'd successfully avoided every situation that might require it. And now she was trapped. Over the next week, the classroom transformed into controlled chaos. Mrs. Davidson met with each student individually to assign their pieces. The advanced students got the complex stuff. Rachel was doing a Chopin nocturne. Jennifer had some complicated violin sonata. Kevin was playing a Spanish guitar piece that required techniques Maya didn't even know existed. As the list of available pieces got shorter, Maya watched with growing dread. Finally, Mrs. Davidson called her up to the piano during class. "Maya, Chen, correct?" Mrs. Davidson looked at her roster, squinting through her reading glasses. "Yes, ma'am." "You're very quiet. I don't think I've heard you speak all semester." Mrs. Davidson said it kindly, but it still stung a little, I guess. "Well, let's see what we have left." Mrs. Davidson flipped through the remaining sheet music. "Do you play any instruments?" Maya hesitated. This was the moment. She could tell the truth or she could keep pretending. "Not really," she heard herself say. Mrs. Davidson nodded slowly. "Have you ever had any music lessons?" "Piano, maybe?" "A little. When I was younger." "How young?" "I stopped when I was 12. "All right." Mrs. Davidson pulled out a thin piece of sheet music. "This is a simple folk melody. Very basic. You play it with your right hand mostly, and the left hand just does simple chords. If you practice a little bit each week, you should be fine." Maya took the paper. The notes looked simple enough. Almost too simple, like something a first grader might play. Actually, Mrs. Davidson said, looking at Maya more carefully, if this feels too overwhelming, you could help with the stage setup instead. We need someone to manage the curtains and the lighting. That counts as participation too. Something about the way she said it made Maya's face burn. Mrs. Davidson didn't think she could do it. She was already being dismissed, shuffled off to the side, given the easy way out before she'd even tried. No, Maya said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'll do the piece. Are you sure? There's no shame in, I'm sure. Mrs. Davidson smiled, but it was the kind of smile adults give kids when they're being polite, but don't really believe in them. Wonderful. Let me know if you need any help. Maya took the sheet music back to her seat. Around her, students were talking excitedly about their pieces, making plans to practice together, discussing performance outfits. She folded the paper and put it in her backpack, then went back to drawing in her notebook margins. That night, Maya sat at her desk and looked at the simple folk melody. The notes were so basic they almost mocked her. She could play this in her sleep. She could have played this when she was 7 years old, but that was exactly the problem. She hadn't touched a piano with real intention in 3 years. Not since her grandmother died. Not since the funeral when everyone kept saying what a shame it was that such a talented young pianist had lost her teacher, her inspiration, her guide. Maya had packed away all the sheet music after that. She'd convinced her parents to let her quit lessons. She'd avoided the piano in their living room like it might bite her. Music had been the language she and her grandmother spoke together, and without her grandmother that language felt broken. Now she was supposed to walk out on a stage and play. Even if it was just a simple folk tune, even if nobody expected anything from her. The thought made her chest tight. She put the sheet music in her drawer and closed it. She'd deal with it later. She had 2 months after all. Plenty of time. But as she turned off her light and lay in bed that night, Maya couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Davidson's face. That look of doubt, that assumption that she'd need the easy way out. Maybe everyone had forgotten who she used to be. Maybe she'd done such a good job hiding that even she had started to believe her own act. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd been trying to ignore for 3 years, Maya's fingers remembered. And they were starting to itch. Maya's earliest memory wasn't of her first word or her first steps. It was of music. She was 4 years old, sitting on her grandmother's lap at the piano bench. Her tiny hands barely stretched across 3 keys. Her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, guided her fingers gently across the smooth white keys. Music is not just sound, her grandmother had said in her accented English, the words mixing with phrases in Mandarin. Music is feeling. It is memory. It is the language when words are not enough. Her grandmother, Lily Zhang, had been a concert pianist in China. Not just any pianist, a celebrated one. She'd performed in Beijing, Shanghai, and cities Maya couldn't even pronounce. But when the political winds shifted in the 1960s, when being an artist became dangerous, her grandmother had fled. She'd left behind her career, her recognition, everything she'd built. She'd arrived in America with almost nothing except her hands and her memory of every piece she'd ever played. By the time Maya was born, her grandmother was in her 60s, teaching piano lessons out of their small apartment to make extra money. She'd never talked much about the life she'd left behind. But when she sat at the piano, Maya could see glimpses of that other woman, the one who'd commanded stages and moved audiences to tears. Maya took to piano the way some kids take to breathing. It wasn't work. It was just what she did. By 5, she was playing simple compositions. By 7, she was tackling pieces meant for teenagers. By 10, she was performing in recitals where parents would whisper and ask who the young girl was and where she'd trained. But her grandmother never pushed her toward competitions or fame. That life, she'd say, shaking her head, it takes more than it gives. I teach you piano so you have a friend for life, someone who listens when no one else can. They practiced every day after school, not in a strict military way, more like a conversation. Her grandmother would play a section, and Maya would echo it back, adding her own interpretation. They'd laugh when Maya made mistakes. They'd play duets, their 4 hands dancing across the keys in perfect harmony. The apartment was small, just 3 rooms, but the piano made it feel like a concert hall. The neigh. Boers never complained. Even the grumpy man downstairs who yelled about everything else would stop and listen when Maya practiced. Once he'd left a note under their door that just said, "Thank you." Her grandmother taught her pieces from every era, classical composers like Bach and Mozart, romantic pieces by Chopin and Liszt, modern compositions that pushed boundaries. But her favorite were the pieces her grandmother had written herself. Late at night, after Maya's parents had gone to bed, her grandmother would sometimes compose. She'd sit at the piano with manuscript paper, humming softly, trying different combinations of notes until something clicked. Then she'd write it down in her careful handwriting, the musical notes flowing across the page like birds. "This one," her grandmother said one night when Maya was 11, "this one is about leaving home, about the things we carry with us even when we have nothing in our hands." She played it for Maya. It was beautiful and heartbreaking. It started soft and uncertain, like footsteps in an unfamiliar place. Then it built into something stronger, more confident, but with an undercurrent of sadness that never quite went away. The final notes were gentle, almost like a lullaby. One day, her grandmother said, "You will play this better than me. You will understand it in ways I cannot teach you." Maya practiced that piece over and over. She played it at her grandmother's birthday party that year. She played it at the community center's holiday concert. Every time her grandmother would sit in the audience with tears in her eyes, smiling. But then Maya turned 12 and everything changed. It started with small things. Her grandmother forgetting where she'd put her reading glasses. Losing her place in the middle of a piece she'd played 1,000 times. Getting confused about what day it was. Maya's parents started having quiet, serious conversations that stopped when Maya entered the room. There were doctor appointments, tests, words Maya didn't fully understand like cognitive decline and progressive. Her grandmother tried to hide it. She'd laugh off her mistakes, make jokes about getting old. But Maya could see the fear in her eyes when she sat at the piano and her fingers didn't quite do what her brain told them to do. The music lessons continued, but they changed. Some days were good, almost normal. Other days her grandmother would get frustrated, slamming her hands on the keys because they wouldn't cooperate. Maya learned to be patient on those days. She'd play for her grandmother instead, and that seemed to calm her. "You're my memory now," her grandmother said one afternoon. "You remember the music I forget." By the time Maya turned 13, her grandmother had stopped teaching other students. She couldn't follow conversations well anymore. She'd repeat the same stories within minutes. But somehow, deep in her mind where words couldn't reach, the music stayed. She could still play some pieces from memory, her hands remembering what her mind had lost. Maya came home from school one October afternoon to find ambulances outside their building. Her heart knew before her mind caught up. She ran up the stairs, pushing past neighbors in the hallway. Her grandmother had collapsed at the piano, just fell asleep, the doctor said, peacefully. Her hands were still resting on the keys. The funeral was small. Some of her grandmother's old students came. The neighbors. Family members Maya barely knew. Everyone told her the same things. "She was so proud of you. What a talented pianist she was. Such a shame you lost your teacher." But they didn't understand. Maya hadn't just lost a teacher. She'd lost the person who understood her completely. The person who spoke her language. The one who knew what she meant even when she couldn't find the words. The piano in their living room became a monument. Maya couldn't walk past it without feeling a weight in her chest. Her parents suggested she continue lessons with someone else. There was a well-regarded teacher across town who had openings. Maya refused. She couldn't imagine learning from anyone else. It would feel like cheating. Like trying to replace something irreplaceable. For weeks, she didn't touch the piano. Then months. Her parents worried but didn't push. They knew she was grieving in her own way. Her father covered the piano with a cloth. "When you're ready," he said. But Maya was never ready. She packed away her grandmother's sheet music in a box and shoved it under her bed. She threw herself into art instead. Painting didn't hurt the same way. She could create something new instead of playing something that reminded her of what she'd lost. By the time she started high school, no one in her new classes knew she'd ever played piano. She didn't mention it. When people asked about hobbies, she said art. When they asked what kind of music she liked, she shrugged and said whatever was on the radio. She rebuilt herself as someone who wasn't a pianist. Just a regular kid who liked drawing and kept to herself. It was easier that way. Safer. But late at night sometimes she'd hear phantom melodies in her head. Her fingers would tap against her desk, playing invisible keys, and she'd remember her grandmother's words. Music is the language when words are not enough. Maya had chosen silence instead. She'd locked away that language and thrown away the key, or so she thought, because now, 3 years later, Mrs. Davidson had handed her sheet music and expected her to perform. And Maya's carefully constructed walls were starting to crack. The box under her bed seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Inside it, her grandmother's compositions waited, especially that one piece, the one about leaving home and carrying memories. Maya hadn't played it since the funeral, hadn't even looked at the sheet music, but she still remembered every single note. The first week after Mrs. Davidson handed out the assignments, Maya did nothing. The sheet music stayed in her backpack untouched. She told herself she'd practice later. There was plenty of time. The second week, she pulled it out once, looked at the notes, put it back. Her palms got sweaty just thinking about sitting at a piano in front of people. By the third week, Mrs. Davidson started asking questions. "Maya, have you begun practicing yet?" she asked after class one Tuesday. "A little," Maya lied. Mrs. Davidson studied her face. "You know, it's really okay if you'd prefer to help backstage. I don't want anyone to feel pressured." There it was again, that assumption that she couldn't handle it. That gentle tone teachers use when they're trying to let you off the hook because they don't think you're capable. "I'll be ready," Maya said. But she wasn't ready, not even close. The assembly was 5 weeks away now, and she hadn't touched a piano. Not the one in the music room. Not the one at home that her parents had finally uncovered, hoping she might someday play again. She started staying after school in the music room, telling herself she'd practice. But mostly she just sat there, staring at the piano like it was a monster. Other students would come and go, using the practice rooms, their music floating through the walls. Rachel working on her Chopin, Kevin's guitar melodies, Jennifer's violin, and Maya, sitting in silence. On Thursday of the fourth week, Mrs. Davidson pulled her aside again. This time her voice was firmer. "Maya, the assembly is in 3 weeks. I need to know you're prepared. If you haven't been practicing, we need to make other arrangements now, not the day before." "I've been practicing at home," Maya said. Another lie. Mrs. Davidson didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "All right, I'd like to hear you play it. Tomorrow after school, just for me, so I know where you're at." Maya's stomach dropped. Okay. That night she finally sat down at the piano in her living room. Her mom heard the bench creak and appeared in the doorway, surprise written all over her face. She didn't say anything, just smiled softly and disappeared back into the kitchen. Maya put the simple folk melody on the music stand. Her hands hovered over the keys. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. She pressed down on middle C. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the quiet house. Then she started playing the piece. Her fingers moved mechanically through the notes. Right-hand melody, left-hand simple chords. It was exactly what it was supposed to be, simple, basic, fine, and it felt completely wrong. This wasn't music. It was just notes in order. There was no feeling, no soul. It was like reading words off a page without understanding what they meant. Her grandmother would have stopped her after the first measure and said, "Where is the heart? I hear fingers, but I don't hear you." Maya finished the piece and sat there staring at the keys. She could do this. She could walk out on that stage and play this simple melody and get it over with. It would be forgettable, unremarkable. She'd blend into the background just like she wanted, but something about that thought made her feel hollow inside. The next afternoon, she went to the music room to play for Mrs. Davidson. The teacher sat in a chair near the piano, pen and paper ready, probably to write notes about what Maya needed to work on. Maya played the folk melody exactly as she'd practiced it. Correct notes, correct rhythm, correct everything. When she finished, she looked at Mrs. Davidson, waiting for judgment. Mrs. Davidson was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, you can certainly play the notes." Maya waited for the but. It didn't come. That's all I needed to see. "You'll be fine for the assembly." "Thank you, Maya," that was it. No criticism, no suggestions, just a dismissal. Maya gathered her backpack and left, but instead of feeling relieved, she felt worse. Mrs. Davidson's low expectations had been met. Good enough was good enough. She found herself walking past the auditorium. The doors were propped open for the custodian who was probably cleaning inside. Without thinking about it, Maya slipped through the doors. The auditorium was bigger than the music room. Rows and rows of seats faced a proper stage with heavy curtains and professional lighting. This was where the assembly would happen, where hundreds of students and parents would sit. On the stage sat a grand piano. Not an upright like in the music room or at home. A real grand piano, its black surface gleaming under the work lights. Maya walked down the center aisle. Her footsteps echoed. She climbed the steps to the stage, her heart pounding harder with each step. She should leave. This was stupid. But her feet kept moving until she stood next to the piano. It was beautiful. Well maintained. Probably tuned regularly for the concerts and assemblies. She lifted the lid carefully, exposing the strings inside. The smell of wood and felt filled her nose. She sat down on the bench. Adjusted it just like her grandmother had taught her. Hands on her lap, back straight, feet flat on the floor. The auditorium was completely empty. No one was here. No one would hear. Maya's hands moved to the keys. Not to play the simple folk melody. Not to practice for the assembly. Her fingers found the starting position for her grandmother's composition. The one about leaving home. The one she hadn't played in 3 years. She hesitated. Her hands were shaking. What if she couldn't remember it? What if the muscle memory was gone? What if trying to play it hurt too much? But something inside her needed to know. Needed to find out if that part of herself still existed. Maya closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes came out tentative, uncertain. Her fingers stumbled a little, searching for the right keys. But then something clicked. The music was still there, buried deep but not forgotten. Her hands remembered. The piece began soft and searching, just like her grandmother had written it. Maya's fingers moved across the keys, and suddenly she wasn't in the auditorium anymore. She was 11 years old, sitting next to her grandmother, watching those wrinkled hands demonstrate the phrasing. She was 12, playing this at her grandmother's last birthday party. She was 13, playing it at the funeral while tears blurred her vision. The music built, growing stronger and more confident. The sadness underneath never went away, but it was joined by something else. Hope, maybe, or resilience. The kind of strength that comes from surviving loss and carrying forward anyway. Maya's whole body moved with the music now. She wasn't thinking about technique or correctness. She was just feeling. Every note carried a memory. Every phrase held a piece of her heart she'd locked away. The tears started during the middle section, falling silently down her cheeks and onto her hands. But she didn't stop. She kept playing, pouring 3 years of grief and love and longing into those keys. She didn't hear the auditorium door open, didn't hear the footsteps stop in the aisle. The piece moved toward its ending. The gentle part, like a lullaby. Like a goodbye. Like a promise that even though someone is gone, the love remains. Maya played the final notes with such tenderness that they seemed to hang in the air, not wanting to fade. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Maya opened her eyes. Her face was wet with tears. Her hands were still on the keys, trembling slightly. She felt cracked open, exposed, like she'd just revealed her deepest secret to the world. Maya. She jumped and spun around on the bench. Mrs. Davidson stood in the center aisle, frozen in place. Her hand was pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were wide behind her glasses. What? Mrs. Davidson's voice came out as barely a whisper. What was that? Maya couldn't speak. She'd been caught. All her carefully built walls had just crumbled, and her teacher had witnessed it all. Mrs. Davidson walked closer, climbing the stage steps slowly, like she was approaching something sacred that might disappear if she moved too quickly. Maya, how long have you been playing piano? I don't, Maya said automatically. I mean, I used to. I stopped. That piece. What was it? I've never heard anything like it. My grandmother wrote it. The words came out thick with emotion. She was a concert pianist in China. Before she came here. Mrs. Davidson sat down on the edge of the stage like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. You played that from memory. I haven't played it in 3 years. Not since she died. Oh, sweetheart. Mrs. Davidson's voice was soft. Why didn't you tell me you could play like that? Maya wiped her face with her sleeve. Because I can't. I stopped playing when she died. That person, the one who could play like that, she doesn't exist anymore. Maya, I just heard you. That was extraordinary. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have come in here. I should go. Maya stood up, grabbing her backpack. But Mrs. Davidson's next words stopped her. What if you played that piece at the assembly? Maya turned around. What? That piece your grandmother wrote. Play that instead of the folk melody. No, no way. I can't. You just did. That was different. No one was here. I can't do that in front of people. Mrs. Davidson stood up and walked over to Maya. She put her hands gently on Maya's shoulders. Your grandmother gave you a gift. Not just the ability to play, but something to say. And that piece, what she wrote, it deserves to be heard. It would be an honor to share it. Maya shook her head, fresh tears coming. You don't understand. Playing that again in front of everyone, it's like opening a wound that finally stopped bleeding. Or maybe, Mrs. Davidson said quietly, it's like finishing something that was left incomplete. Honoring her the way she would have wanted. Maya stood there, torn between running away and staying. Between hiding and being seen. Between silence and speaking the only language that had ever truly felt like home. Think about it, Mrs. Davidson said. You don't have to decide right now. But Maya, what I just heard was the most beautiful thing I've experienced all year, and I think your grandmother would want the world to hear it too. She squeezed Maya's shoulder gently and then walked away, her footsteps echoing across the empty auditorium. Maya stood alone on the stage, the piano waiting behind her, her grandmother's music still echoing in her heart. The assembly was 2 weeks away. Maya didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the moment in her head. Mrs. Davidson standing in the aisle, the look on her face, the question that now hung in the air like a weight. What if you played that piece at the assembly? It was impossible. Completely impossible. Playing alone in an empty auditorium was one thing. Playing in front of hundreds of people was something else entirely. And playing her grandmother's composition, something so personal, so raw in front of strangers. The thought made her feel sick, but the idea wouldn't leave her alone. The next morning at breakfast, her mom noticed the dark circles under her eyes. You okay, honey? You look tired. Maya pushed her cereal around in the bowl. I'm fine. Just thinking about the assembly. Her dad looked up from his newspaper. That's next Friday, right? We wouldn't miss it. You're coming? Maya's voice came out sharper than she intended. Her parents exchanged a glance. Of course we're coming, her mom said gently. We come to all the school events. But they hadn't heard her play piano in 3 years. They didn't know what she was capable of anymore. Or what she'd lost. The thought of them sitting in the audience made everything feel more real and more terrifying. At school, Maya avoided the music room. She couldn't face Mrs. Davidson yet. She didn't have an answer, and she knew the teacher would ask. But during lunch, while Maya sat alone in the library sketching in her notebook, someone sat down across from her. It was Rachel Stevens. The piano prodigy. The one heading to Juilliard. Hey, Rachel said. Maya looked up, confused. Rachel had never spoken to her before. They existed in completely different worlds. Hi. So I heard something interesting from Mrs. Davidson this morning, Rachel said, leaning forward. She said you played something in the auditorium yesterday. Something incredible. Maya's stomach dropped. She told you that? She tells me everything. I'm kind of her favorite. Rachel said it without arrogance, just stating a fact. She said you've been hiding some serious talent. That you played a piece your grandmother composed. Maya closed her notebook. It was nothing. Just messing around. Mrs. Davidson doesn't get emotional about nothing. She had tears in her eyes when she talked about it. That stopped Maya cold. She hadn't seen Mrs. Davidson's face after the moment. She'd been too focused on escaping. Rachel studied her for a moment. Can I ask you something? Why are you hiding? I'm not hiding. Come on. I've watched you all semester. You sit in the back, never participate, act like you don't care about music at all. But clearly you do. So what's the deal? Maya didn't owe Rachel an explanation. She could just get up and walk away. But something about Rachel's directness, the genuine curiosity in her voice made Maya pause. My grandmother taught me, Maya said quietly. She died 3 years ago. Playing reminds me of her, and that hurts. So I stopped. Rachel's expression softened. I'm sorry. That's really hard. Yeah. But can I tell you something? Playing that hurts is better than not playing at all. Rachel tapped her fingers on the table. Music isn't just about the happy stuff. It's about everything. The grief, the loss, all of it. That's what makes it real. Easy for you to say. You're going to Juilliard. You know why I'm going to Juilliard? Rachel leaned back in her chair. Because I practice 6 hours a day. Because music is my entire life. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it because I love it or because I'm too scared to stop. You stopped. That takes guts. But starting again? That takes even more. Maya looked down at her hands. Her fingers, which had felt so alive on the piano keys yesterday, now felt ordinary again. Mrs. Davidson wants me to play my grandmother's piece at the assembly, Maya admitted. Are you going to do it? I don't know. I'm terrified, Rachel smiled. Good. If you're not terrified, you're not doing anything worth doing. I'm terrified every time I perform. The nerves never go away. You just learn to play through them. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? Then you mess up. Then you freeze. And life goes on. Rachel stood up, gathering her things. But Maya, if that piece is as good as Mrs. Davidson says it is, you owe it to your grandmother to share it. That's how she lives on, through the music. Rachel walked away, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. The rest of the week crawled by. Maya couldn't stop thinking about what Rachel had said. About how her grandmother lived on through the music. She'd never thought about it that way before. On Wednesday, she finally talked to Mrs. Davidson. I'll do it, Maya said after class. I'll play my grandmother's piece. Mrs. Davidson's face lit up. Really? Oh, Maya, I'm so glad. But are you sure? I don't want to pressure you. I'm not sure about anything, but I think I need to do this. Do you have the sheet music? Maya nodded. It's at home, in a box under my bed, with all her other compositions. Bring it tomorrow. I want to hear you play it again. Not to judge, just to help you prepare. That night, Maya pulled the box out from under her bed. She'd taped it shut after her grandmother died, like, if she sealed it tight enough, the pain might stay contained too. She cut through the tape carefully. Inside were stacks of sheet music, some printed, some handwritten in her grandmother's distinctive script. There were recital programs with Maya's name listed, photographs of her grandmother at various pianos over the years, a dried flower from her grandmother's funeral. At the bottom was the composition. Journey Home, her grandmother had titled it. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the notes written in pencil that had smudged slightly over time. Maya's mom appeared in the doorway. Is that Grandma's music? Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mom came and sat on the bed next to her. She picked up one of the photographs. It showed a much younger woman at a grand piano, mid-performance, her face intense with concentration. She was so proud of you, her mom said softly. Every single day she'd tell me how talented you were, how you understood music in a way most people never would. I miss her so much. I know, baby. We all do. Her mom put an arm around Maya's shoulders. Is this for the assembly? Yeah. I'm going to play this piece she wrote. Her mom looked at the sheet music, at the careful notes and the title. She would love that. She always said this was her favorite composition. She called it her legacy. What if I can't do it justice? What if I'm not good enough anymore? Her mom turned Maya's face toward her. You could never dishonor her memory. Not by trying. The only way you could disappoint her is by not trying at all. She'd want you to play even if it's imperfect. Especially if it's imperfect. That's what makes it human. Maya spent the next few days practicing, not in secret this time. She practiced at home, the music filling the apartment for the first time in 3 years. Her dad would stop whatever he was doing and just listen. Her mom would stand in the hallway, smiling with tears in her eyes. She practiced after school in the music room, with Mrs. Davidson sitting nearby, offering gentle suggestions about phrasing and dynamics. Not changing what Maya did, just helping her refine it. Word spread through the music class. Maya Chen, the quiet girl from the back row, was playing something special at the assembly. Rachel gave her an encouraging nod whenever they passed in the hallway. Even Kevin and Jennifer, the other talented students, seemed curious. But with each practice session, Maya's anxiety grew. The assembly was Friday. Today was Thursday. Less than 24 hours away. That afternoon, Maya practiced in the auditorium one last time. The actual space where she'd perform. Mrs. Davidson had arranged it, wanting her to get comfortable with the acoustics and the feel of the stage. Maya sat at the grand piano, the same one where everything had changed a week ago. She played through the piece once, twice, 3 times. Each time felt different. Each time revealed something new. You're ready, Mrs. Davidson said from the audience seats. I don't feel ready. You'll never feel ready. That's the secret of performing. You just have to do it anyway. Maya looked out at the empty seats. Tomorrow they'd be filled. Students who didn't know her. Parents who'd never heard of her. Teachers who'd expect another forgettable performance from another forgettable student. And her parents who hadn't heard her play in 3 years. What if I cry in the middle of it? Maya asked. This piece, it's so emotional. What if I just break down on stage? Mrs. Davidson walked down the aisle and climbed onto the stage. Then you cry, and you keep playing, or you stop, take a breath, and start again. There's no wrong way to honor someone you love. That night, Maya barely touched her dinner. She laid out her clothes for tomorrow. Black pants, white shirt, simple and appropriate for a performance. She set her alarm extra early. She put her grandmother's sheet music in a folder, treating it like the precious thing it was. Before bed, she stood in front of the covered piano in her living room. She pulled off the cloth her father had put there years ago. Underneath, the piano gleamed. She ran her fingers along the edge, not playing, just touching. I'm going to play your song tomorrow, Grandma, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know if I can do it right, but I'm going to try. For you. She could almost feel her grandmother's presence, that gentle, encouraging energy that had always surrounded their lessons. That voice that said, music is feeling. It is memory. It is the language when words are not enough. Tomorrow, Maya would speak that language again, in front of everyone. And whatever happened, there would be no going back to the quiet, invisible girl who sat in the back row. The assembly was 12 hours away. Maya woke up before her alarm went off. Her stomach was in knots. She'd dreamed about the piano all night, her grandmother's hands guiding hers across the keys, then fading away like smoke. She got dressed slowly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her white shirt. In the mirror, she looked pale, terrified. Nothing like a performer should look. Her mom made her favorite breakfast, but Maya could barely eat 2 bites. The food felt like cardboard in her mouth. You're going to be wonderful, her dad said, squeezing her shoulder. Maya just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She tucked her grandmother's sheet music carefully into her backpack, treating it like glass that might shatter. The morning at school dragged on forever. Maya couldn't focus in any of her classes. Teachers' voices sounded like they were underwater. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion, each tick bringing her closer to the moment she was dreading. At lunch, she couldn't eat. She sat in the bathroom stall, breathing deeply, trying to calm the panic rising in her chest. This was a mistake. She should have stuck with the simple folk melody. She should have helped backstage like Mrs. Davidson originally suggested. What had she been thinking? Rachel found her there, somehow knowing where she'd be. Hey, you okay? No, Maya admitted. I think I'm going to throw up. Good, that means you care. Rachel leaned against the sink. I threw up before my last competition. Still won second place. What if I freeze? What if my hands stop working? Then you'll be human. Look, Maya, everyone out there is expecting nothing from you. They don't know who you are, so anything you do will surprise them. There's freedom in that. Maya came out of the stall, washing her hands with cold water, splashing some on her face. My parents are out there, she said. Mine too, and they've heard me mess up plenty of times. They still love me. The assembly was scheduled for 2 o'clock, the last period of the day. By 1:30, students were filing into the auditorium, laughing and talking, treating it like any other boring school event they had to sit through. Maya stood backstage with the other music students, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Mrs. Davidson was checking on everyone, making sure they had their instruments, their music, their confidence. Rachel was first, then Jennifer with her violin, then Kevin on guitar. Maya was fourth on the program. Mrs. Davidson had put her near the beginning before the audience got too restless. The lights dimmed. The principal gave a short welcome speech that Maya didn't hear. Then Mrs. Davidson walked onto the stage to introduce the performances. Rachel played a complicated Rachmaninoff piece flawlessly. The audience applauded politely. Jennifer's violin was beautiful, technically perfect. More polite applause. Kevin's Spanish guitar piece made some people sit up and pay attention. Better applause than Mrs. Davidson was speaking again. Our next performer is Maya Chen. Maya is a junior, and today she'll be playing an original composition written by her grandmother, Lily Zhang, who was a concert pianist in China. This piece has never been performed publicly before. Please welcome Maya. Maya's legs felt like rubber as she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, hot on her face. She couldn't see individual faces in the audience, just dark shapes filling the seats. Somewhere out there were her parents, Rachel, her classmates, strangers. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted it just like her grandmother taught her. The auditorium was settling into that restless quiet, the kind where people are waiting but not really expecting anything special. Maya placed her grandmother's sheet music on the stand. Her hands were shaking. She put them in her lap, trying to steady them. This was it. No going back now. She looked down at the keys. Black and white, simple, familiar. Her grandmother had sat at pianos like this hundreds of times. In China, in America, in their tiny apartment. These keys had held all her grandmother's joy and sorrow, her memories and dreams. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes came out soft, almost fragile. The opening was meant to sound uncertain, like footsteps in an unfamiliar place, like someone leaving everything they knew behind. In the audience, the restless sound stopped. Something in those first notes made people pause. Maya's hands moved across the keys and suddenly she wasn't on a stage anymore. She was 7 years old, watching her grandmother demonstrate this exact passage. She could almost smell the jasmine tea her grandmother always drank. Could almost hear her voice saying, "Feel the notes, don't just play them." The piece built slowly, carefully. Each phrase told part of the story. The fear of leaving home, the courage it took to start over, the things carried in the heart when hands are empty. Maya's fingers found their rhythm. The muscle memory was there, strong and sure, buried beneath 3 years of silence but never really gone. This was her grandmother's story, but it was also hers. The story of loss, of carrying forward, of finding your way when everything familiar is gone. The middle section grew stronger, more confident. The melody soared and Maya's whole body moved with it. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore, wasn't worried about mistakes. She was just feeling, just remembering, just honoring the woman who'd taught her that music was the language when words weren't enough. And then the tears came. They fell silently down Maya's cheeks as she played. She didn't stop, didn't wipe them away. She just kept playing, pouring every ounce of love and grief and gratitude into those keys. In the audience, people sat transfixed. Students who'd been checking their phones put them away. Parents who'd expected to sit through another routine assembly found themselves leaning forward, caught in something they didn't fully understand but could feel in their bones. Maya's mom gripped her dad's hand, her own tears falling. Her dad's jaw was tight, his eyes shining. They hadn't heard their daughter play in 3 years. They'd almost forgotten this side of her existed, the side that could take pain and transform it into something beautiful. Mrs. Davidson stood in the wings, one hand pressed to her heart. In 30 years of teaching, she'd never heard a student play with this much raw emotion, this much truth. Rachel sat in the front row, her performer's mask finally cracking. She understood now what Mrs. Davidson had meant. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. This was a soul speaking. The piece moved toward its ending. The gentle part like a lullaby, the notes that said goodbye but also promised that love doesn't end with death, that the people we lose stay with us in the things they taught us, the beauty they showed us how to create. Maya played the final notes with such tenderness they seemed to hang in the air, not wanting to fade. Her hands lifted from the keys slowly, reluctantly, like saying goodbye all over again. Then silence. Complete, absolute, breathless silence. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, no one moved. The moment felt suspended, like the whole auditorium was holding its breath. Then someone started clapping. It was slow at first, almost hesitant. Then someone else joined, then more. Then suddenly everyone was standing and the applause was thunderous. It rolled over Maya in waves, startling her back to reality. She looked out at the audience, finally able to see through her tears. Everyone was on their feet. Students were clapping hard, some with tears on their own faces. Parents stood applauding. Teachers too. Her mom and dad were in the middle section, both crying openly, clapping until their hands must have hurt. Mrs. Davidson walked onto the stage, her own eyes wet, and put a hand on Maya's shoulder. The applause continued. Some people were whistling. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Maya stood up from the bench, shaky and overwhelmed. She'd expected to feel exposed, vulnerable, broken open. And she did feel all those things. But she also felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt whole. Mrs. Davidson hugged her, whispering, "Your grandmother would be so proud." Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She looked out at the standing crowd, at all these people who just witnessed her pour her heart out, and she realized something. She hadn't just performed her grandmother's piece. She'd kept her grandmother alive. She'd taken the gift she'd been given and shared it, just like her grandmother had always hoped she would. The music hadn't died when her grandmother died. It had just been waiting, patient and quiet, for Maya to be ready to speak that language again. As Maya walked off the stage, Rachel caught her in a quick hug. "That was incredible," she said. Other students surrounded her, saying things Maya barely registered. She was still floating somewhere between the stage and reality, between grief and healing, between silence and sound. Her parents found her backstage. Her mom pulled her into a tight embrace, and Maya finally let herself sob. Not tears of sadness anymore. Tears of release, of completion, of finally letting go while still holding on. She was there, wasn't she? Her mom whispered. "She was with you up there." Maya nodded against her mother's shoulder, because it was true. Her grandmother had been there in every note. In her hands, in her heart, in the music that would always connect them. That afternoon, Maya's life changed. Students she'd never spoken to stopped her in the hallways. Teachers she barely knew congratulated her. The story spread through the school. The quiet girl from the back row who'd played something that made everyone cry. But the real change was inside Maya herself. She'd been so afraid that playing again would break her. Instead, it had begun to heal her. That night, she sat at the piano in her living room. She didn't play her grandmother's piece. She just sat there, hands on the keys, feeling the connection. The unbroken line between past and present, between loss and love, between a grandmother and granddaughter who spoke the same language. "Thank you," Maya whispered to the empty room, to the memory of wrinkled hands guiding hers, to the woman who'd given her this gift. "Thank you for the music." And somewhere in that space where love goes when people leave, Maya felt her grandmother smile.